to bring those creations to life?
I've been an independent reporter in Northwood Hills for the past 6 years. I've covered corruption, disappearances, clandestine rituals. I thought I had seen it all. But the trip I took to St. Nicholas Hollow still keeps me up at night. It all started with a conversation in a small downtown diner. An old man with trembling hands leaned in and said, "If you really want stories, go to St. Nicholas. Out there, the dead never stay quiet." I assumed it was another local legend, but the fear in his eyes unsettled me. So I grabbed my backpack, my notebook and my recorder and headed deep into the heart of Kentucky, searching for a town no one mentions. But everyone nearby is afraid to name. St. Nicholas Hollow is a place frozen in time. The pickup truck that gave me a ride stopped at a dirt road, and the driver refused to go any farther. He said that after sunset, not even money could get him near that place. I walked alone down a narrow path, flanked by gnarled trees and moss-covered stones. As I got closer, the air grew denser, as if each step weighed more than the last. The houses in town were made of old timber and clay, most with no windows. Doors bolted shut. Absolute silence. Not even a stray dog. Just the occasional gaze from behind a curtain. I greeted an elderly woman, but she turned her face away without a word. I tried to speak to a young man outside a small store, but the moment he saw me, he vanished inside. It was as if my presence disturbed the entire town. Until, in the main square, a man with a wide-brimmed hat murmured as he passed, "Find Mr. Harlan. He'll tell you what the others won't." I asked a local baker about him. She avoided my eyes, but nodded toward a dirt path. I walked for more than 20 minutes, until I reached an old wooden house, its porch choked by dry vines. Sitting in a creaky rocker was a thin, sun-worn man with skin like leather, smoking silently. He didn't look at me when I arrived. He simply said, "You made it." I stood there, unsure whether to speak. It felt like that man already knew more about me than I did, as if he'd been expecting me. Eventually, I said my name, told him I was a journalist, and that I wanted to hear the stories from this town. Mr. Harlan didn't reply right away. He just motioned for me to sit beside him. The sun was starting to set, and a dry breeze stirred the red dust on the ground. If you're someone who loves stories like this, subscribe, hit the bell, and let us know in the comments what's been your most haunting life experience. And just as I pulled my recorder from my backpack without looking at me, Mr. Harlan said in a grave tone, "The dead around here speak softly, but they speak." What he told me next was only the beginning. I sat in silence next to Mr. Harlan. The wood of the bench groaned under me, like it too distrusted a nosy outsider. He kept his eyes on the horizon, not moving an inch, as if he was listening to something I still couldn't hear. The house sat at the edge of a steep ridge. From there, you could see part of the town's cemetery, crooked crosses and sun-bleached headstones scattered across the hill. In the distance, an old rusted bell swayed in the wind, though no one had touched it. Mr. Harlan took a swig from a clay jug, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and finally spoke. "Not everything that dies stays silent." That sentence shattered the stillness. Then he began to speak. His voice was coarse, like each word scraped its way out. He didn't speak fast, nor was he trying to impress. Every phrase was deliberate, as if he'd been telling the same stories for decades. He told me that in his youth, he had worked as a gravedigger's assistant, that he was raised among wakes, rosaries, and dawn burials, that he'd learned to recognize the whispers carried on the wind from beneath the soil. "Here, we show respect to the dead," he said, "and to their stories too." I turned on my recorder and nodded silently. "I'm going to tell you the things no one writes down, things that never make it into newspapers or folklore books, the things that live in corners people refuse to look at." I cleared my throat. The air was dry and dusty, and tension had parched my mouth. Mr. Harlan, still unmoving, continued, "You want to know why this town feels stuck in time? Because some things won't let us move forward. Some memories anchor into the ground like ancient roots." He explained how over the years he learned to distinguish the silences of each part of town. The square has one, the graveyard has another. But the most dangerous is at the base of the ridge. That silence, it's heavy. As he spoke, I realized he never looked directly at me. His eyes remained fixed on some faraway point, as if he saw something I couldn't. That unnerved me more than his words. It felt like he wasn't just speaking to me, but to the lingering presences around us. The sun had vanished behind the mountains. The shadows stretched long, slowly engulfing the cemetery below. The sky had turned a dusty red, like it shared the same hue as the dirt road. Mr. Harlan rose slowly, his back bent from age and the weight of what he carried. He stepped inside and returned with a second chair, which he placed beside his own. "What comes next isn't easy to hear," he said, settling back in. "But if you really want to understand why the dead don't rest here, you need to start with the story of Mary Inez." And so, without theatrics, he opened the door to the first tale that would rob me of sleep for weeks. "The first cemetery to awaken was the one in Pine Hollow," Mr. Harlan said, lighting a hand-rolled cigarette with steady fingers, despite his years. "And it woke up for love, or what remained of it. Mary Inez," he explained, was the daughter of farmers who lived north of town, in a clearing surrounded by mesquite trees. A quiet woman, but known by all for her smile and her devotion to the young man she was to marry. The wedding was set for a Sunday in September, the altar decorated with marigolds, and the entire community preparing for the celebration. But the night before, the groom vanished. No one knew why or where he went. Some said he ran out of fear, others believed something that didn't want the union to happen had taken him. At dawn, Mary Inez was found dead, still wearing her white dress. She had taken her own life, seated in front of a mirror, her eyes open, fixed on her own reflection. She was buried the next day. No ceremony, no music, no goodbyes. Only a few hands laid her in the ground, the dress untouched, her face covered by a veil. "They say the earth didn't want to take her," Mr. Harlan murmured. He told me that since then, on every full moon, a faint cry is heard in the cemetery. First, a soft whimper, almost motherly, then it turns into a long sob that chills the blood. Many in town have heard it, but few dare get close. One did, though. Valentine, an out-of-town mechanic, bold to a fault and not half as wise. Valentine had come with a crew fixing electrical poles nearby. He laughed off the tale of Mary Inez in front of the old men at the bar and swore he'd go to the cemetery that very night to prove it was all nonsense. And he did. He just didn't come back the same. "We saw him go down the path under the moonlight," Mr. Harlan recalled. "He walked among the graves and reached the corner where her headstone stands. Something happened there. He never said what, but he came back white as ash, eyes wide, shaking, wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond, just stared into nothing." Valentine was taken to the clinic in Hillside. Doctors found nothing physically wrong, but the boy spent weeks in silence. When he finally managed to whisper something, it was just one sentence. "She called me by another name," and she was crying. Mr. Harlan dropped the cigarette stub onto the ground, crushing it under his sandal. His gaze remained locked on the horizon, but his voice dropped a notch. "They say she won't rest until someone tells her what happened, or until the one who left her, wherever he is, comes back to give her peace." A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't fully dark yet, but the shadows were deep enough to make me dread what was coming next. And Mr. Harlan, not giving me a moment to breathe, continued, "But if you think that was tragic, wait until you hear what happens at the dry crossing. What happened to Mary Inez weighs heavy on the soul," murmured Mr. Harlan. "But what happens in dry crossing? That burns you from the inside." He glanced at me briefly and then nodded toward a distant ridge of hills, now swallowed in the evening shadows. "Out there, where the sun cracks the rocks and even the vultures won't fly at noon." Dry Crossing wasn't a regular cemetery. It was a scorched stretch of land between two hills where, according to him, they buried those who died trying to cross the region. Migrants, drifters, nameless folks, no family, no prayer. The ones no one came looking for. He said that during the worst drought years, many had fallen there. Children with cracked lips, mothers holding nothing but air, men with eyes washed pale by the sun. There were no rites, just shallow pits dug in dry soil, covered with dust and stone. And there they stayed, with thirst clinging to their bones. I said nothing. The story was so raw, even the night air felt heavier on my chest. Mr. Harlan continued, "I'm not going to tell you they're ghosts like in the movies. No, what you feel at Dry Crossing is different. It's absence, a kind of emptiness that seeps into your skin." He told me about a group of young men who tried cutting through the area to reach the city faster. It was summer, and the heat scorched even the rocks. They carried full bottles of water, wore hats, sunscreen. But as they neared the ridge, something strange happened. One said his throat was burning. Another claimed his tongue was stuck to his palate. The youngest, the one who knew nothing of the stories, dropped to his knees sobbing, saying he felt fire inside him. Despite their canteens being full, all of them showed signs of severe dehydration. A truck driver found them later, slumped beneath a cactus, eyes vacant, murmuring names no one recognized. "And then there are the moans," Mr. Harlan added. "If you dare pass by there at high noon when the air doesn't even sigh, you can hear them." I asked what kind of sounds. "Wails, like people buried underground who aren't asking for help. Just water." He paused for a long while, his eyes glinting with some memory he wished he hadn't held on to. "One time, I had to escort a doctor from the capital. He wanted to prove it was all hallucinations. We drove past the ridge without stopping. The moment we crossed it, the doctor started bleeding from the nose, said it was the heat. But when I looked at him, he was pale as wax. The doctor never returned. Weeks later, he sent a letter saying he'd been dreaming of dry mouths and hollow eyes ever since. Mr. Harlan scratched his beard like swatting away a thought. "Some places dry you out from the outside, others dry you from within." Before I could say anything, he leaned forward, his eyes fixed on mine, and said, "You want to know what kept me from sleeping for months? I'll tell you about Mr. Leander, the grave digger from St. Firmin." Mr. Harlan extinguished the cigarette against the chair's edge with a slow, deliberate movement. Then he looked up toward the nearest graveyard, as if something was calling to him from there. "Now I'll tell you about Mr. Leander, the man who never stopped working, not even after death. St. Firmin is the most recent cemetery in town. It sits at the base of a low ridge, surrounded by rusted wire and a gate that creaks even when there's no wind. But when Mr. Harlan says recent, he means it's only about 70 years old, which around here counts as nearly modern. Mr. Leander had been its sole caretaker for over 4 decades. He lived in a small adobe house behind the cemetery, no running water, just an old cot for company. Folks said he rarely spoke to the living, but often whispered to the dead. He knew them all by name, even the ones without headstones. He knew where they lay, how they died. It was like he kept a list in his mind. Children feared him. Women avoided his path. Not because he was cruel, but because he didn't seem entirely of this world. People spotted him walking between the graves at night. Oil lantern in one hand, shovel in the other, like waiting for someone who hadn't arrived yet. He died one morning, alone on his cot, as though he had finally merged with the soil he had tended all his life. Mr. Harlan was one of the few who attended his burial. They laid him to rest in the center of the cemetery, just as he'd requested, surrounded by those he'd served. He used to say that place was his home, and the dead were his family. But peace didn't last. The first moonless night after his funeral, a man walking back to town swore he saw someone wandering among the graves, tall, lean, slow-moving, with the same lantern Leander used. He watched the figure disappear in a blink. Then the rumors began. People hearing shovels striking dirt when no burials had occurred. Crosses appearing freshly placed where no graves had been before. A woman found fresh flowers on her son's grave, years untouched. No one knew who had left them, but the most chilling account came from someone who claimed they saw Mr. Leander standing at the gate, back turned, motionless, as if waiting his turn. I had an experience too. I was young, no grey in my hair yet, walking back from a party, drunk and a bit lost. The gate was open. I felt something watching me. I turned, and there, in the center of the cemetery, was a long shadow. It didn't move, but I knew it was watching me. Mr. Harlan fell silent. The wind picked up at that exact moment. And before I could ask anything, he spoke again, softer this time. But if you really want to know what hell looks like, then brace yourself for the story of Colonel Bustamante. Mr. Harlan lowered his voice, as if what he was about to reveal demanded a deeper kind of hush. His gaze sharpened, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I sensed something truly disturbed him. Of all the dead who roam these hills, the most dangerous is the one who was buried alive in power. Colonel Nazario Bustamante. I'd heard the name whispered around town. Some said he was a retired officer. Others claimed he was a soulless land baron. But everyone agreed he was cruelty incarnate. He came here with money, guns and hate, Mr. Harlan said. He bought up a massive estate, fenced off miles of land, and built a stone mansion in the heart of the woods. No one entered without permission. No one left without a debt. He beat his workers, shamed the elderly, and rumor had it he ordered a boy buried alive for stealing a mare. When he fell ill, he never sought help. Instead, he commissioned a colossal mausoleum. Black stone, a rusted cross on top, and two figures carved on either side, one blindfolded, one with its mouth covered. He wanted to be buried with his secrets and his rage. He died on a moonless night. Some say his foreman poisoned him. Others say his own body gave out under the weight of his wickedness. He was buried on the estate, far from town. No priest, just a few trembling men who sealed the tomb in silence. No one ever lived in that mansion again. The walls crumbled over the years, but the mausoleum, it stands untouched, and whatever's inside hasn't stayed still. Mr. Harlan told me that curious folk had gone poking around, some out of thrill-seeking, others chasing the treasure rumored to be buried with him. None escaped unharmed. One afternoon, 3 young men entered with flashlights and cameras to shoot a video. Only one made it back. The youngest, Andy, was found wandering the highway, clothes torn, barefoot, his eyes vacant. He never spoke of what he saw, only muttered, "He doesn't sleep, he sees everything." Mr. Harlan shuddered at the memory. You can't see a presence, but you feel it. A cold that doesn't come from the breeze, a rage that grips your bones. I swallowed hard, asked if he'd ever gone there himself. He nodded silently. Only once. I didn't cross the gate, but as I neared it, the birds stopped singing. The air smelled of rust and wet soil, and I felt someone waiting for me. He leaned back in his chair. For a moment he looked much older, his eyes lost in the darkness, like reliving something he'd rather forget. But not all spirits are angry or vengeful, son. Some just want to play a little longer. After speaking of Colonel Bustamante, Mr. Harlan stayed quiet for a long while. The wind had stopped, and though the stars filled the sky, everything felt heavier. I didn't want to break that silence, but he did, with a deep sigh and softer words. Not all souls wander out of fury, son. Some weep because they never got a chance. Then he told me about the cemetery at El Hollow, a hidden grove among thorny brush beside a dry stream bed. No one goes there without reason. It's not on any town map. There's no gate, no name. Just a clearing beneath twisted trees where tiny crosses stand, hand-painted, adorned with faded plastic flowers. That's where they buried the children who died unbaptized, he said. voice trembling. The ones who never got to live. The ones who left before they could speak. I shivered. Something about that place touched me differently. It wasn't fear. It was something else, maybe sorrow. Mr. Harlan told me the mothers of the town would visit secretly, leaving rag dolls, tin toys, pacifiers, little things no one else would ever use. But the strange thing is, the toys don't stay where they're left. Next day, they're found at different graves. As if the children played together, still laughing. I suggested it could be the wind. He shook his head. The wind doesn't sit a doll upright, facing the sunrise. He told me the story of Ms. Carmela, a woman who lost her only child to a sudden fever. A few weeks later, she went to El Hollow to leave flowers. She was alone. She swore that while she prayed, something gently tugged at her skirt. She turned quickly, but no one was there. And then she saw him. On the other side of a cross, standing perfectly still, was the little boy, smiling, waving a tiny hand before vanishing like dust in the light. She didn't feel fear, Mr. Harlan told me, just a sorrow that settled deep into her bones. Other mothers had told similar stories. Laughter floating through the trees, voices whispering, "Mama," right against the ear. And when they left that place, something in them had changed, as if they carried a piece of that hidden corner inside their chest. I dared to ask if he had ever gone there. He lowered his gaze. I went once. Not for me, for my sister. She lost a little girl, had no one else. She asked me to go with her. We left a stuffed bear. We came back a month later. The bear was hanging from a branch, like someone had placed it there to get a better view. I stayed silent, a knot tightening in my throat. That part of the story didn't scare me like the others, but it hurt, in a way I didn't expect. Mr. Harlan stood slowly and walked to the door. Outside, the shadows had thickened. He turned back toward me and said, "The worst of it. The worst came one night, and that night, son, everything woke up." Mr. Harlan shut the door carefully, as if what he was about to share shouldn't be allowed to slip into the open air. He sat back down, but this time didn't lean into the chair. He stayed upright, tense, his eyes fixed on the oil lamp, whose flame flickered gently. What I'm about to tell you wasn't folklore. It wasn't a story. It was real. The whole town lived it. And I did too. He drew a long breath. It happened more than 40 years ago. A dawn that no soul here has ever been able to forget. It started with a sudden change in the weather. It was dry season, weeks without a single drop of rain. But that night, the sky split black. Heavy clouds appeared out of nowhere. The air turned dense. Then came the wind. A wind that seemed to scream, to howl, to slam against doors with invisible fists. Tiles flew off roofs. Trees creaked like they were about to snap. And then the sounds began. Mr. Harlan counted them off with his fingers slowly. From Pine Hollow Cemetery came the crying. Loud, desperate. It was the bride. I swear it. Screaming like someone had torn her heart out. Udu from Dry Crossing. Dry, cracked moans, like someone dying again and again, begging for water. In St. Firmine, shovel strikes. Whack, whack, like Mr. Leander was digging as fast as he could. And from the old estate, a roar, not human, not animal. A sound that made your teeth chatter, like the colonel had opened his eyes. People in town panicked. They locked their doors with crosses, lit candles, prayed aloud. No one left their homes. No one slept. The sky rumbled, but there was no lightning, just that unholy noise, like the dead were demanding attention. Mr. Harlan looked at me. I was with my wife and 2 small children. We huddled in the kitchen. The lamp trembled. I was drenched in cold sweat, and then I felt it. He couldn't explain it. A weight in his chest, a certainty that they were not alone. It was like the veil between this world and the other had been torn open. For hours the noises continued. Then just as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped, but peace didn't return. There was silence, but not the kind that soothes. A silence like the air itself was waiting. The next morning, no one spoke loudly. The streets were deserted. Candles still burned in windows. One child woke up mute. A dog was found dead on the church steps. I asked Mr. Harlan if it had ever happened again. Not like that, but ever since that night, something's been different, like we glimpsed a part of the world we were never meant to see. The lamp's flame seemed to dim for a moment. He leaned in toward me and said, "After that I learned that words carry weight, and some listeners don't breathe." After recounting that night, Mr. Harlan stayed quiet for several minutes. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt him. His eyes remained locked on the flickering flame, as though he feared his words had crossed some invisible boundary. Then he turned slowly to face me and asked, "You're going to write all this, aren't you?" I nodded. The notebook on my lap was filled with notes, and the recorder was still running, though it now felt like a fragile vessel, too flimsy to hold what I had just heard. I told him yes, that my goal was to share what the world had forgotten. Mr. Harlan took a deep breath and let out a long, weary sigh. "I don't mind you writing it down, but write it with respect, son. Around here, words don't get carried off by the wind. Around here, they stay." I looked at him, not fully understanding. "Mock the dead, and they'll come for you. Turn their pain into gossip, and you'll anger them. And believe me, you don't want to know what happens when the dead feel insulted." He told me about a stranger who once came with the same intent, wanted to shoot a documentary. He laughed at the stories, changed names, added things that never happened, said this was all cheap folklore. Not long after he published his video, strange things started happening, repeated nightmares, whispers in his ear. One morning he woke with scratches on his back, another his voice was gone. In the end, he left the country. They found him alone in a hotel room in Louisiana, claiming something was watching him from the ceiling. There was no threat in Mr. Harlan's voice, just warning, just care. You don't play with what's buried, because sometimes what's buried is still listening. I felt a weight on my chest. I wondered if I was truly ready to carry these stories, if I could share them without breaking something I didn't understand. "The dead remember," he said, "and they hear." He advised me to use false names, to avoid precise locations, to respect the silence around every grave. Some truths should be told with humility, as if you were walking on sacred ground. I tucked the recorder away with trembling hands. I wasn't afraid of Mr. Harlan. It was something else, a realization that what I'd heard had changed me. "Have you ever mocked things like this?" he asked. "No," I said. "Good, because they know. They always know." And before I could say anything else, he rose slowly, as if his body had aged 10 more years. He opened the door and pointed toward the town's main road, now swallowed in thick, total darkness. "Go get some rest, kid. Tomorrow is another day. But tonight they're closer." That night I didn't sleep. I stayed sitting in the room they lent me, a space with a tin roof, a wooden bed, and a cross hanging above the door. Outside, the town was quiet, but not a peaceful quiet. It was thick, like it was listening. I reviewed my notes with shaky hands. I read sentences I had written myself, and they no longer sounded the same. They weren't just words, they were marks, weights. At dawn, I knocked on Mr. Harlan's door to say goodbye. He was already outside, sitting in his usual chair, as if he hadn't slept either. He looked at me silently and gave a single nod, approving that I was leaving. Then he stood with effort, stretched like aging wood, and said the last thing I'd hear from his lips. "Remember, you were the one who wanted to listen. Now, you'll carry it too." I thanked him, but my voice cracked. Something in me knew that moment marked a crossing. Like stepping past that path meant something would stay with me forever. I walked back through the streets of St. Nicholas Hollow. The houses were still shut tight, the windows covered. But this time, I felt eyes on me from every corner. Not with hate, not with fear, with memory. As I passed by the first cemetery, the one at the edge where this whole journey began, I stopped. The crosses were still crooked, some with tattered ribbons. others half swallowed by the dirt. A gust of wind stirred the dust, and for a second, I thought I heard a whisper. Not a word, just intent, a voiceless echo. I kept walking. The truck waiting to take me back was already there. When I climbed in, I looked back one last time. Mr. Harlan's house was no longer visible. The town seemed to have hidden itself again, as if it had never existed. Back in the city, I tried to write. I published part of the story, changed the names, blurred the places, honored every bit of care Mr. Harlan had asked of me. But to this day, I've never finished telling it all, because sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear footsteps in the hallway, because sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that tall shadow standing between two crosses, and because in dreams, I hear children's voices crying on the wind and the sound of a shovel striking dry earth. I don't know if everything I heard was true, but I know what I felt. And once you've heard the voices from the hollow, there's no way to silence them.